from all over our region, this is Kaleidoscope. For years capturing the good news, interesting places, and remarkable people doing their best. This is Kaleidoscope, presented by the Pennsylvania Great Outdoors Visitors Bureau.
Hello and welcome to Kaleidoscope. I'm Sarah Cameron. Coming up, there's more to the world of hunting than just waiting for that perfect animal. The stories a retired game warden writes about are now in a book, Investigations and Divine Interventions. We talk to the author about the craziest times in his career. Plus, it's almost that time of year.
Ladies and gentlemen, Punxsutawney Phil!
A look inside the inner circle of Punxsutawney Phil and the secret to his weather predictions. But first, you're either a hunter or you know one. After decades of a career with hunters, a retired game warden followed suggestions that he should put his professional stories on paper. The result became a wildlife book called Investigations and Divine Interventions by Dick Bodenhorn. And in this segment, also a suggestion from a viewer. Dick, why don't you give us a little bit of your work history with how this came about, the book?
Well, actually, my commitment with the Game Commission, or my adventures with the Game Commission, started in 1977 when I became a deputy game protector. They were called back then. Yeah. And that was in Jefferson County. I served for 8 years there and then went to the Game Commission training school in 1985. And upon graduation from there, came up here to Elk County and served here in Elk County until I retired in 2012.
So then where did the idea of the book come about?
I had a very unique career. I always told everybody I didn't have a job. I had a way of life that fortunately they were paying me for. I probably had some of the most interesting investigations that were known to the Game Commission at the time anyhow. Some of them were just absolutely bizarre in the way the evidence came together that convinced me that there was some power, with a lot more authority than the game warden, that was playing a hand in bringing some of these people to justice. So that's what made the stories for the book. And then when I retired, people that were familiar with some of those cases and investigations told me that you should write a book.
This isn't the only one, though.
Right. I wrote one book. Okay. But whenever I sent everything to the editor, she read through it and sent me an email, said that she wanted to make 2 books out of it.
You're going to remember certain stories.
Oh, yes.
What are a couple, maybe just 2 or 3 that have always stuck out to you that you included?
A couple of the more interesting divine intervention ones. One was the last day of the flintlock season, which is when basically the only firearm that hunters can use to be hunting deer is a flintlock. The last day of that season, there was a little bit of snow on the ground, and a guy called me and said that he had found where somebody had killed a deer with a .30-06 rifle, which is illegal. So I called a deputy, picked him up on the way, and we got there. And by the time we got there, it's dark. But we found where not only they had killed one deer and taken it, and we found a .30-06 casing, right there to prove that that's what it was shot with. But in our snooping around there, we found where a second deer had been wounded. And there were 2 hunters, and they were tracking that deer that they had wounded. And of course, in the snow, we've got tire impressions from the vehicle and boot impressions. But we start following this wounded deer and these 2 hunters as well. So we find where this deer has laid in a person's yard. But it's not there anymore. We did come back the next morning and parked up there on the hill where this all started and followed the tracks back down. Got back down in the yards, and again, we couldn't find any evidence where this deer had continued to go beyond that point. So we decided, well, let's go look for our suspect vehicle. We knew what kind of vehicle, what kind of vehicle. We knew it was a narrow wheelbase and relatively short 4-wheel drive. And there's just a little bit of snow on an embankment, and lo and behold, there are the deer tracks and the blood trail. And it led us within probably 15 feet from the corner of a house, and goes down across the yard and dies at the end of the driveway. So I told the deputies, I said, but the deer's not there. There's now a drag mark going up the driveway toward the garage. So I told the deputies, I said, here are the keys, go get the state vehicle, bring it down. And there's a little bit of snow in front of the garage. And lo and behold, there's the vehicle tracks and the 2 sets of boot prints from the guys that had shot the deer half a mile away. So what are the odds of a deer leading the game warden right to the house of the suspects that he's looking for? I mean, that's just bizarre.
Yeah.
You know, that's bizarre. You know, they killed this deer, and the deer wanted its revenge, I guess.
Yeah.
But I have to believe that that wasn't just a coincidence.
Coming up later in the show, Dick shares another crazy story from his time as game warden. We'll be right back. Now back to the book, Investigations and Divine Interventions, a collection of stories by retired game warden Dick Bodenhorn. After decades in the game business, Bodenhorn has seen a lot. He shared with us another time of when he was surprised on the job.
It's a Sunday morning in archery season, you know, and I'd been out on night patrol, so, you know, I'd just gotten up when my phone rang. Turned out it was a deputy waterways conservation officer, and he had received a call from some guys that had gone to where they hunt, to a camp, and they went out scouting, and lo and behold, they found where somebody had shot a deer, freshly. So I told the deputy, I said, I'll be up, and we get up there, and lo and behold, we get the deer, and so on and so forth, and talked to these guys, and it was really bizarre because they had just gone through there and turned around and were coming back when they saw this little deer, small deer, standing off in the woods about 75 yards, and they thought, well, it doesn't want to leave there. Maybe we should get out and look. Maybe there's a reason we would want to hang a stand there, since deer like that area.
Yeah.
So the 2 guys walked down, and the reason this young deer doesn't leave there is because there's its mother laying there on the ground, shot through the neck and still freshly pumping blood. So whoever shot it had just shot it. And in the meantime, while they're looking at this, some of their other buddies come up into the same area, and they had just passed a 6-wheeled Polaris ATV with a hunter on it, dressed in camouflage, with a synthetic barreled rifle with a synthetic stock, or not a synthetic, but one of those anodized finishes on the barrel. So they gave us a pretty good description of the vehicle and everything, and so this deputy and I decided, well, we're going to follow the ATV tracks. So we did. Sure enough, we found the 6-wheeler parked in a yard, and knock on the door, nobody had come to the door. I found the 6-wheeler sitting there, and in the back of it is like a feed bag, if you know what that is. It's like a large bag.
Yeah.
There was something in it, but it wasn't a deer. It was something flat type. But I took pictures of all of that. Of course, there was a vehicle there, but we ran the registration on it, so we knew who we were dealing with.
Yeah.
So we start hiking back up over the hill, and it's steep. It's a steep hill. And we're probably 75 yards from the top, maybe 100 yards from the top. And I hear blub, 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 blub. And you can just see the top of a guy's head coming across, just back over the edge of the hill to where he's on an ATV. And he goes just past us, and he stops. And you can hear the machine sitting there idling. And I told the deputy, I said, take cover. I said, this guy might shoot at us or something.
What happens next? Find out when we come back. So how did Bodenhorn's investigation turn out? Well, let's wrap it up.
And after a little bit, the ATV went on out the trail. So we hiked back up to the top and get up there, and we're going the same way the ATV's going. We have to go that direction. And we get out there where this machine had been sitting there idle, and I look, and there's, against the tree, is this bag. I said, that looks like the bag that was in that Polaris 6-wheeler. I walked down, and sure enough, it is. And laying there beside it is this black synthetic stocked rifle that's still loaded, laying there with it. You know, so now here we are, 2.5 miles from where this deer was shot, and 6 hours later. And the guy comes out and hides the gun,
Yeah.
and in the bag was a meat gamble, a meat saw, and a rope for butchering a deer in the field. So what are the odds of 2.5 miles and 6 hours later, the guy comes out and hides the evidence within 100 yards of the game warden that's looking for it?
Now, well, people wanted you to write these books. Why did you decide to actually do it? What do you want people to get from them?
It was as much to let the public know just how much is involved in an investigation, and it's a lot more complex than what they think it is. But also, I wrote it for other officers, you know, younger officers that are still working. If you don't do the homework, you know, and go out there and look for all that evidence, it's just lost to you, you know, and we have an obligation to the public and the resources out there to do our best to bring these wildlife criminals to justice. And wildlife crime is a lot different than, you know, crimes that, you know, the local police are working on.
Okay.
Usually they've got witnesses that can tell them what happened.
Oh, yeah, and that's...
You know, and we don't have.
Yeah.
You know, the deer have never called me and said, hey, you need to come out here, somebody just shot my buddy. You know, I mean, that's just not reality.
It doesn't work that way. So where do we find the book, sir?
Well, basically I'm selling them out of my house. So if people send me an email or get a hold of me on Facebook, send me a check, they can get books. They're also available here at one place in Ridgeway, Cliffy's Prescription Center here in Ridgeway. They do have them. And down at the Elk Visitor Center in Benezet, they have them there.
Okay.
So those are the two places that are selling them besides, you know, through me. But if you buy them there, you don't get them personalized and autographed, you know, signed and dated and everything that people like in books, where if they get them directly from me, they're a little less expensive directly from me too. When somebody goes out there and kills more than their share, you know, kills illegal game, they're not hurting the Game Commission. They're not hurting the game warden. What they're doing is they're a thief. They're stealing some other hunter's opportunity for success, which is part of why I got into being a game warden to start with.
What do you think you mean by that necessarily?
Well, you know, there's only so much wildlife out there, you know, and there's enough to go around. And the seasons and bag limits are set up to make sure that nothing gets over harvested. But if somebody goes out there and kills 2 or 3 extra deer, they're not hurting the resource really. What they're doing is they're stealing some 12, 13-year-old kid's opportunity for success. You know, because they removed something that should have been out there for some other hunter. And that's what got me into wildlife law enforcement to start with, is I hunted with a young individual that should have got a deer one day. There was a lot of shooting around us. And then I found out that it wasn't a lot of hunters doing all that shooting. It was one hunter that shot 5 does in one day.
Wow.
Back when you were allowed 1 deer a year. So he shot the does that should have been coming to that young boy.
And that does it for this episode of Kaleidoscope. To learn more about Kaleidoscope, check us out online or like our Facebook page. And as I always say, for a different view of our region, look at life through our Kaleidoscope. We'll see you next weekend.